Jesica Glover, a national board certified teacher, literacy educator, and parent. And this is My Child Can't Read, a Heartland Crisis, a documentary-style podcast exploring the literacy crisis in Kansas and across the country through research, policy, and the lived experiences of children, families, and educators. So after wrapping Season 4, we wanted to sit down with someone whose reporting helped shape the national conversation around how children learn to read. Emily Hanford is an investigative journalist with APM Reports and the creator of the podcast Sold a Story. Her work helped bring national attention to reading instruction and why so many students were struggling. But this conversation isn't about revisiting what we already know. It's about what comes next. What does it actually take to move from awareness to action? Over the past season, we've spent a lot of time looking backward, tracing the history of reading instruction, the policies, the systems, the disconnect between what research tells us and what's actually happening for kids in classrooms. We asked difficult questions this season about teacher preparation, about accountability, about leadership, about the complicated relationship between policy and practice. And after all of it, we kept coming back to one question. What happens after awareness? Because understanding the problem was never supposed to be the ending. The real question is, how do systems actually change? How do classrooms change? How do outcomes for kids change? So after wrapping Season 4 of My Child Can't Read, a Heartland Crisis, we wanted to sit down with someone whose reporting helped shape the national conversation about literacy in America. Emily Hanford is an investigative journalist with APM Reports and the creator of the podcast Sold a Story. Her reporting has helped many parents, educators, and policymakers begin asking new questions about how children learn to read and why so many students were struggling. But in this conversation, we wanted to go beyond how we got here. We wanted to ask, what does it actually take to move from awareness to action?
One of them is what we focused on in Sold a Story, which is that just a lot of teachers weren't taught how to teach a child to read when they got their teacher preparation, wherever that was, in college or some other alternative preparation. Many teachers say this over and over again. I didn't learn how to teach kids to read. And some of them have said to me, I was really hoping no one was going to assign me first or second grade because I knew I didn't know how to teach kids to read. And then they were a first grade teacher and they realized, wow, I don't know how to do this. And it's often when they're confronted with a kid who's really struggling and they're like, gosh, I don't know what to do. And as you heard in the podcast, what's really sad is that there are many teachers who really had that aha strongly when their own child struggled with reading.
Yes.
So they've been teaching first grade for 5 or 10 years, and then their own child goes off to kindergarten and first grade and really struggles, and they don't know how to help him or her. And that's when it really hits home. I think another thing that I've been thinking a lot about is the fact that this news of the quote unquote science of reading and all of this research really was news to so many teachers. That's something that I think we all need to think about in terms of the teaching profession and education writ large. Teaching education is not unique for the fact that there's lag time, that people resist at first, that it can take a long time to sort of get it in the water. But I think one of the things that some people have pointed out to me, and I've been thinking about a lot, is education has this kind of pendulum thing that goes on, though, that I don't know, and people can correct me if I'm wrong, I don't know that that's so true in other professions. So people have given the analogy of medicine, some people gave the analogy of flying and aviation. there are systems you need to put in place to get good stuff into practice, but it doesn't go away. Like once a profession has accepted that something is best practice, they stick with it. And I think what we've seen in education is this will sort of go towards evidence-based practice and then go away. And then, we're having a moment of trying to come back to it. And I think it's speaking just to a larger problem about the profession as a whole. And one of the things that we see in education is that often policymakers and state legislatures get involved, and then teachers are like, why are these lawmakers getting involved? And they don't like that. But part of the problem is that the profession isn't set up in a way that it's evolving well on its own, and it keeps having to get these like push from legislators. And we're seeing these pushes from legislators can sometimes end up in overdoing it, or there's unintended consequences of certain pieces of legislation. Legislation is kind of like a hammer, and as you know, this stuff is very, very nuanced. And so a lot of times these laws come along and they don't necessarily have the impact that we want, because it's kind of a hammer going into a really complicated, nuanced field.
One of the things that stood out most in this conversation was Emily's emphasis on systems, not individual blame, not simple solutions, but systems. And maybe that's part of what makes literacy reform so difficult, not because people don't care, but because changing systems is far more complicated than simply recognizing there's a problem.
It matters so much. And so I guess you would think that because it matters so much, we would have sort of solved it earlier. But I think the fact that it matters so much also means that a lot of people have opinions and thoughts and beliefs about it. And I think going back to what I said at the very beginning about the field of the profession of education, I think it is a profession that has been vulnerable to fads and sort of the next new big thing, in part because it hasn't been as kind of carefully based on sort of the building of evidence over time and saying like, here's the body of knowledge, here's what we know. I just think education has just been very vulnerable to being sort of whipped around, from one way to the next. So the other thing that I think should be humbling to everyone is I think there are many, many well-intentioned people. So there's no easy fix here. Talk to education researchers and they will put good evidence-based programs into these rigorous studies. And when they find just a small effect, a small overall effect, it's really great news. It's actually hard to move the needle on educational achievement, partly because it's hard to make it show up on average, and because there's a lot involved in it. And we've always been tussling with the real things that there's a lot of other factors that affect kids' achievement in school.
Yes.
And so, so this is just like, it's a really complicated topic. Like we shouldn't expect to see, I think when you see big, quick results, there's always a reason to be a little bit skeptical. Like, I don't think this stuff happens big or quickly. But I also do think that we do have really good stuff in the research base to show us that when evidence-based practices are put into effect over a long period of time and they're sustained, that it can have a measurable impact on kids and their performance.
One of our podcast guests described it like turning the Queen Elizabeth, slow, incremental movement over time. Because when you're talking about large systems, teacher preparation, curriculum, leadership, implementation, there are so many interconnected pieces moving at once.
There's obviously many components to good reading instruction, and the work I did, for example, was pretty narrowly focused on sort of one very important foundational part of the equation, but only one part of it, which is like, how well can kids read the words? Are they being taught how to read the words? Are they basically being expected to figure that out on their own? But there's much more to becoming a good reader than just being able to read the words, as I've pointed out many times in my reporting. And so I think one of the things that happens is when people start to look at a problem in any area, but in education in particular, whatever, there's like some aspect of it like that they are looking at, and then the solutions tend to focus on that aspect of it, which is what's happening now. And then some of the other aspects of it get forgotten. not letting the pendulum go backwards. I think that's one of the things that happens, is not letting this like, see, we tried the quote unquote science of reading and it didn't work. Like, that doesn't make a lot of sense. It's like, well, we're not seeing the movement we maybe want in reading scores. We know from all this research on reading itself that some of what we're doing is the right thing to do, but there's obviously more in some area that we need to do, or maybe we're overdoing it in some area. It's like a precision kind of approach, not a kind of like, well, let's give up on that and try something new. It's like, this is about sort of building the details upon an agreed upon foundation. And I think that is one of the things that gives me a lot of hope. I think this quote unquote science of reading movement is bringing more people into agreement on a basic set of facts, a basic set of evidence about reading and how it works. Like, okay, we can all agree on it. And we didn't all agree on that for a long time. You know, there's just a lot of fighting about like my science and your science. And I don't believe that. And I have a different, way of thinking about this. Mm-hmm. And I think even some of the really big influential people in this world who were big advocates of some of the things that Sold a Story showed us were not what you want to do when you're teaching kids, have come over to say like, oh, well, I accept this. I'm interested in this research too. I'm learning from this research, and let's move on from here rather than move backwards.
Throughout this conversation, one word kept surfacing: agreement. Not perfect agreement, not easy answers, but a growing willingness to acknowledge a shared research base and keep building from there. So what gives you hope right now?
I think what gives me hope is that there are a lot of people who are really interested in learning more about this topic. Like, there's a real hunger for information among educators, teachers in particular. And while I think knowledge isn't enough, teachers need more than just the knowledge of this. They need the support of their coworkers. They need the systems in their schools and their states to work for them. I just have a tremendous amount of hope because so many people are recognizing that not only is this issue important, but that there's a lot to it and they want to know more. So that's a great thing for me as a journalist, since what I'm trying to do is help people understand more. What I'm seeing is like people want more information. People are interested in this topic, and I think that's great.
And maybe that matters more than we realize, because sustained change rarely begins with certainty. It begins with people becoming willing to learn. In Kansas, we've seen 20 plus years of stalled outcomes, gaps in teacher prep, and a real disconnect between policy and classroom practice, kind of like I alluded to earlier. Does Kansas sound unique or familiar compared to the other states or areas that you've done some research in?
Of course, these are systemic issues, right? And so that means that even though there are little differences in policies and things state to state, just like is true of children, that they're more alike than different in terms of what they need to become good readers. The states are more alike than they're different in terms of what they're doing policy-wise, especially because, many of them are trying to now do something about this reading problem. But if you're in a state, wherever it is, where it feels like things are, it's like 2 steps forward, 1 step back, I think that's because that's what happens in a lot of places. There's been a lot of reporting and people who look at policy or looking carefully at some states and trying to understand what are the ingredients that make a state successful. I think what I've learned from that work, from those people, is that it isn't just one thing. I mean, Mississippi is an example that a lot of people look at. And I think one of the things that's clear when you look at Mississippi is they've been working on this problem for a long time. I mean, a lot of people go back to 2013 when they passed their sort of first big Literacy Promotion Act policy. But in fact, it goes back way before that even. I mean, there were many people in the state really thinking about all of the different policy levers and about teacher prep in particular, going back to the early 2000s. So now it's 2026. So we're talking about a state that has been moving the needle in some really impressive ways, but really they've been doing it for like almost a quarter of a century. And I think one of the things that the woman who was in charge there, Dr. Carrie Wright, is now in my home state of Maryland as the state superintendent. And actually, there's a really nice interview that I did with her. I'm associated with this museum in Washington, D.C. called Planet Word. It's a museum of words and language.
Okay.
And we have guests every few months. And so Carrie Wright was there to talk about what she's trying to do in Maryland and what, she's trying to bring from Mississippi.
Okay.
You can see this on YouTube. It's also on the Soul to Story webpage. And, I think what she emphasizes over and over again in this interview that I did with her, and many times when I've seen her present, is just that in Mississippi, they passed a law, and then they realized that the law needed to be changed, and they made changes. And then they kept going, and they needed another change. They just realized at each piece they bit off, they're like, oh, there's another piece. Oh, there's another one. Oh, we need to change this. And so, I think that's the answer. You can't just pass a law and be done with it.
Mm-hmm.
Because usually it takes more than just whatever you were doing with that one law. Plus, just because you pass a law doesn't mean people are going to follow it.
Right.
So there has to be accountability. There has to be follow-up. The lawmaker that gets the bill passed has only done the very beginning of the job.
What Emily describes here is something we've seen throughout this season in Kansas. That meaningful change doesn't happen because of one law or one curriculum or one training. It requires sustained effort, alignment, follow through, and perhaps most importantly, humility, a willingness to keep learning, keep adjusting, keep listening.
I think one of the things actually that parents should understand is that the reason we're sitting here talking about the science of reading right now is I would really trace back to parents. I think it's the advocacy that parents were doing around their kids who were struggling in school, specifically some of these groups that were advocating for kids with dyslexia, that kind of got us where we are. I mean, they're the ones that first got my attention. That's where my reporting started.
Okay.
It started with kids with dyslexia, and then sort of more generally made me think, well, how do people learn to read? And how are kids being taught? And that's how I started to understand all this larger thing about the science of reading. And when you look at the history of literacy laws in the United States, you'll see that a big wave of literacy laws, actually going way back, even back into the 90s, but there's often a parent or a parent advocacy group that's behind that. So I think one of the messages to parents is that their voices have been incredibly effective in this whole debate. It's because they've been speaking up and saying, there's a problem here, that we're even talking about this today. I mean, a confluence of things happened. All that parent advocacy, plus the research itself had sort of matured and expanded in such a way. There were a number of people out there who were sort of making it accessible and explaining it. We wouldn't be where we are today if we hadn't had all those things. The parents who were pushing for laws and advocating for their kids, the research that was already starting to be translated into a language that makes sense for practitioners, right? I don't think for teachers it's about going into the reading journals and reading the most basic scientific research. It's the years of it and the overall conclusions, and then people themselves translating it for others. Journalists like me and others who've come along, I mean, in the work that I've done has been followed up by a lot of great journalists all over the country who've been looking at what's going on in their own states and in their own school systems. But anyway, that's the message for parents, I think, is that speak up about this. And if you feel like you're alone, especially around this reading issue in particular, you're not. There are other parents in your school who are having the same problem. They might not know that there are other kids in the school having the same problem too. So find the other people who are facing the problem you have. And, parents have a lot of power here.
When you think about the literacy crisis, what still concerns you?
Well, certainly what a lot of people say to me is older kids. The best thing to do is to fix this from the start and get this right from when kids are coming into kindergarten. But just what about the 5th graders and 6th graders and 8th graders and 12th graders out there right now? And what people are telling me is that it's very challenging for a number of reasons to figure out how to help kids who are older. Who's going to help them? In what part of the school day? With what materials? With what person who has the expertise to do it? Many of those kids are already very beaten down, they don't like school. They don't feel good about themselves. That's really hard. And I don't think anytime we have this moment of thinking about, we need to do something about reading, I think it's very hard to figure out what to do about the kids who who missed out. And, and I think even if you talk to people in the research world, there are still kids who are going to struggle sort of no matter what, like lots of good instruction and they're still struggling. And I think researchers are still really trying to figure out a lot of the complexities of dyslexia and learning and reading disabilities. It's an important area of research. We're also in a time when a lot of the funding for research is going away, and this is affecting whether we'll be able to answer some of these questions in the future. So it's not like we've answered all the questions yet. But again, I think one of the things that gives me the most hope is not only that people want information, but there is starting to be an acknowledgement of a research base. And I think that's huge.
Where could this go wrong even now with the people interested and like from your point of view and what you've found so far?
Well, overemphasizing one thing at the expense of others. I mean, I think one of the things that many people say to me that's very obvious from my years of reporting in schools is that in some ways, it is kind of a zero-sum game, what you decide to do in schools, because there's only so much time in a day and days in a year and years that kids are in school. And so when you're adding something in, then you're necessarily not doing something else enough or well. And so I think that's where this can go wrong, is an overemphasis on one part of it at the expense of others. And so that's just, there's not like one answer you can give to be like, well, here's the magic formula. I think it's just something that everyone needs to stay attuned to.
Over the past season, we've spent a lot of time looking backward, asking how we got here. But this conversation reminds us that awareness alone was never the goal. Action is slower than outrage. Change is harder than headlines. And real progress requires more than agreement. It requires sustained commitment from parents, from educators, from leaders, from systems willing to keep learning. So as season 4 comes to a close, maybe the question isn't, do we know enough yet? Maybe the question is, what are we willing to keep building, even when the answers are complex? Because somewhere tonight, there's still a child wondering why reading feels so hard. Because every child deserves the chance to read. And this story isn't finished yet. Thanks for listening to My Child Can't Read, a Heartland Crisis. If this episode resonated with you, if you saw your child, your classroom, or your community in these stories, you're not alone. Now is the time to act. Every child can learn to read, and we all share responsibility to make it happen. I invite you to take action today by subscribing to catch every episode, rating and reviewing to help others find this series, sharing your story and learning how the Phillips Fundamental Learning Center is changing lives at funlearn.org/podcast, and by sharing this show with a friend, teacher, or parent who needs to hear it. All resources, source credits, and tools mentioned in this episode can be found in the show notes. Together, we can take responsibility and rewrite the story of literacy, one child, one classroom, and one school at a time right here in the Heartland.